Om Sarva Bhuta Yada Devi Bhukti Mukti Pradayini Tvam Stuta Stuta Yekava Bhavantu Paramoktayaha. O Devi, who have become all things, who bestow enjoyment and liberation, when you are praised, what words, however excellent, can extol you? Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Good morning. During this season of the year here at the Vedanta Society, we pay respect to the Divine Mother in three aspects through special worships called pujas. On October 5th, we initiated the season with Durga Puja here in Santa Barbara. That was followed in Hollywood on October 27th, the evening of October 27th, with Kali Puja. This morning, as I speak to you here in Hollywood, they are celebrating the puja of Sri Sarada Devi, the Holy Mother, and that puja will be held here in Santa Barbara this coming Wednesday on December 18th. The title of today's talk is Shakti, One and Many. And to begin, it would be helpful to get our philosophical bearings on what we're going to talk about. In the Vedic tradition, in the ancient Upanishads, we find that the supreme reality is referred to as Brahman. And this Brahman is said to be infinite consciousness. In two of the very early Upanishads, the Chandogya and the Taittiriya, we find a statement that Brahman, seeing itself to be one, said, "Let me be many, let me embody myself forth, bahusyam prajayayeti." And so Brahman projected the world and entered into it. This is a very different view from what we find several hundred years later, couple thousand years later, in Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. There, Brahman is that infinite ultimate reality that is consciousness, but that Brahman is considered to be inactive and eternally changeless. This whole world of dynamic change is superimposed upon Brahman by Maya, and this world is a misleading appearance. That is the Advaita Vedanta view. Now, what about the Tantric view, which will actually form our point of reference for today's talk? In the Shiva Tantra, the ultimate reality is called Shiva. Shiva is Brahman, infinite, pure consciousness. And this pure consciousness, this Shiva, also has its own power of self-expression and creativity, which is called Shakti. Shiva and Shakti are one and the same reality, consciousness and its own creativity. Now, the word Shakti is a Sanskrit word that means power, ability, strength, might, energy, or capability. And this can be used as a common noun in any number of circumstances to describe any type of power, either secular or sacred. Now, if we consider this a proper noun, Shakti becomes the name of the Divine Mother, the supreme reality as creative power. And that same creative power is consciousness itself. So Shakti is essentially dynamic. She has the ability to assume any name, any form, any attribute, any aspect. As a matter of fact, all the diversity of the creation. And so we can look upon Shakti as expressing herself as this entire cosmos, and also we can look upon her as expressing herself in specific ways as aspects of the Divine Mother, the goddess. Durga, Kali, Lakshmi, Saraswati, Parvati, Uma, Bhairavi, and on and on and on. Now, the idea of Shakti, one in many. Let's look at this idea of one in many. The idea of one in many implies a contrast. There's a difference in our thinking between this and that. So there's one, and then many might suggest to us the idea of not one. In other words, maybe singular and plural, or maybe whole and fragmentary, maybe unitary and multiple. If we look at this more philosophically, we might say that one represents the infinite, many represents the finite and diversified. Or we might say the universal and the particular, or going a little higher philosophically, the transcendent and the immanent. This takes us to the idea philosophically of duality and non-duality. And this is important not only for our particular outlook or what we might think philosophically or intellectually, but it also has a profound bearing on how we actually carry out our spiritual practices. If our perspective is one of the non-dualist, we're likely to follow the path of knowledge, the path of jnana. And the goal of this path is to seek identity with the divine. Self-realization is the realization of identity with that divine reality. On the other hand, if we're more dualistic, there's the idea of the divine and the worshiper of the divine, the beloved and the worshiper. And so here we have the idea of bhakti, the path of devotion. And the idea of bhakti is not to establish identity, but rather to establish a relationship with the divine. And of course, that divine, in the case of the Shakta, would be the loving mother. She is our loving mother. We are her children, devoted to her. Now, both ways and both points of view are equally valid. And the goal of both of them is the same, in that the goal is to experience the divine. The idea of the one expressing itself as the many forms one of the cornerstones of the Tantric philosophy. And we're going to look a little bit at this philosophy first. Shakti can represent herself as multiple goddesses. Shakti can manifest herself as the whole of creation. There is one energy and countless ways of expressing itself. So we're going to turn to a tantric text called the Shiva Sutra. This was written perhaps about in the late 800s, 9th century. It was said to be revealed to a holy man named Vasugupta. And we can compare it in quite a few ways to the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. The Yoga Sutra is what I like to call a guidebook to the human mind. The Shiva Sutra can be called a guidebook to divine consciousness and to its manifestations. And just as the Yoga Sutra's aim is to give us instruction and guidance in a practical way, so too is the Shiva Sutra. It is a work of great practical guidance. I'm going to read 3 of the sutras, and we're going to look at what they might imply for us. The first sutra I'm going to read is this: the universe grows out of the inherent power of this divine consciousness. Inherent power, the Sanskrit word is swa-shakti, its own power. And its own power is the power of the divine consciousness. The second sutra reads, when the creative power of consciousness, again, Shakti, is fully engaged, physical manifestation arises. So this engagement, this creative power, gives rise to this world that we live in. It is the whole world of our own experience. The third sutra is this: the basis of ordinary knowledge is the creative power of consciousness. By ordinary knowledge, this sutra means the experience of the world, everything we see through the senses, everything that we reason through the mind, all of our empirical knowledge, the experiential knowledge of this world is this ordinary knowledge. The world is the object of that knowledge. And Shakti is both the creative power that gives rise to this world. Shakti is also that awareness by which we experience the world. In this particular sutra, the word creative power is expressed in Sanskrit by the word matrika. This is a very interesting word. It has a lot of implications. It's related to the English word matrix. Matrika, matrix. And what is a matrix? It is something within which something originates, takes form, and develops. Matrika is also a respectful term in Sanskrit for mother. And so the idea of matrika also carries this whole concept of giving birth. Again, Shakti is reaffirmed here as the Divine Mother who gives birth to the universe. She contains everything in potentiality that produces the world of our actuality. And we ourselves, as part of this world of actuality, are manifestations of the Mother. The Tantra philosophy also uses the term matrika in a more technical sense. And I won't go into the details of it here, but just a broad outline. Matrika means the 50 basic sounds or phonemes that constitute this Sanskrit language. These phonemes or sounds are cataloged in a very scientific way linguistically, according to how they are produced by the vocal apparatus. In the sense, we can call then these 50 sounds the alphabet of creation. When we look at the image of Kali, we find that she's wearing a necklace of 50 skulls around her neck. This is that alphabet of creation. And it has both a positive and a negative image to convey to us. The positive idea is, yes, this whole universe, the world, everything is created by the Divine Mother. It's her manifestation. It's all divinity expressing itself. But then we have the idea of the skulls, which represent death. So the idea here is that everything that is created also comes to an end. This entire world of our experience is, by its very nature, impermanent, transitory, ephemeral. Even before the Shiva Sutra was written, there were other tantric philosophical texts. The Shiva Tantras also spoke of the idea of consciousness being both prakasha and vimarsha. Prakasha is Shiva. This is consciousness in its own essence, its own shining forth. The word prakasha literally means a shining forth. So this is the light that illumines all else. But prakasha is also vimarsha or Shakti, its own self-expressiveness, its own self-awareness, its own creativity. So this Shiva and Shakti are a single reality. Vimarsha is also a synonym for matrika, and it is also a synonym for Shakti. And the Shaivites have a saying which sums it all up very nicely. Without Shiva, Shakti would have no being, and without Shakti, Shiva would have no expression. Another word for the creativity of consciousness is paravak, supreme speech. So, in other words, the universe, as we know it, is an utterance of the divine. Now, this idea shouldn't seem too strange at all for anybody who is familiar with Western traditions. The Hebrews and the Greeks both spoke of it. In the creation account of Genesis, in the first chapter, we find the phrase, "and God said," 10 times repeated, expressing this whole process of creation, and God said. And then in the Greek philosophy, we have the idea of logos, the word, the creative power. But long before that, even in India, in the Rig Veda, the earliest of all the Hindu scriptures, we have the goddess celebrated as Vak, speech. Creativity through the energy of sound. And there's a wonderful hymn in the Rig Veda called the Devi Sukta. And in this hymn, the mother herself says, "I breathe forth like the wind, setting all the worlds in motion." Today, science tells us that sound moves through the air much in the way that waves move through water. This was not unknown in ancient times. In the Tantralika, the light on the Tantra, the great Kashmiri seer Abhinavagupta wrote that sometimes the ocean is filled with waves, and sometimes it is not. In either case, it never ceases to be water. In the same way, consciousness, with or without waves, is consciousness. Our error is to think of the waves as something other than the water that is their source and substance. Our error is to see everything in this world as it merely appears, and not as the divine manifestation that it truly is. Getting back to the alphabet of creation, Kali's necklace of 50 skulls, we find in the Shiva Sutra that this concept is referred to as the Matrika Chakra, the wheel of the creative energies. This again can get very technical, but I'm going to read one of the sutras just to explain its practical application. The sutra reads, "The goal is the perfect knowledge of the wheel of creative energies." Now, what's practical about this? If we watch our mind, we become aware of its activity. We see thoughts arise. We see them take form. We see them express themselves as language, whether we speak it or whether we're merely thinking it. And then we see it again subside. It just dissolves. Where does this all come from? Where does it go to? Seemingly out of nowhere and back to nowhere. But that's logically impossible, because something cannot come out of nothing. Where it comes from is the matrix of consciousness, and where it returns is back to that same source that gave it birth. This is Shakti in action. Do you ever stop to consider the power of words? Words are made of phonemes, these basic sounds that we call vowels and consonants. And these constitute this wheel of creative energies, the Matrika Chakra. So these vibrations of physical sound give outward expression to the vibrations of thought within our minds. Words convey information, but they can also express feelings, and they can invoke responses in our part. Words can bring joy, they can provide comfort, they can provoke fear, they can awaken anger, they can convey misinformation, or they can transmit true knowledge. Outwardly, we interact with other people through spoken language, spoken and written language. Inwardly, that same language drives the private activity of the mind, all of our thoughts and feelings. So this language can perpetuate our bondage, or it can point us towards liberation. In practice, we find that all thoughts, feelings, perceptions, all of it, are nothing but projections of consciousness. This is divine self-expression through the Matrika Chakra. And in this light, if we can understand everything as the divine expressing itself, we can rise above any worldly tribulation. So the present sutra tells us, I'll repeat it, the perfect knowledge of the wheel of the creative energies. This is a matter of seeing things as they truly are. Now, the non-dualistic philosophy of Tantra can become very technical. So we're going to turn to somebody who can explain it very simply to us. And that person is Shri Ramakrishna. In 1856, he became the chief priest of the newly constructed temple to Kali at Dakshineshwar. And daily he would worship Kali, seated before the black basalt image. The image depicts Kali in a very beneficent manner. She's Bhavatarini, the Divine Mother who takes her children across the world of the ocean of worldly existence. In later years, Sri Ramakrishna became very respected as a wise and holy man, and visitors would flock to Dakshineshwar to be in his presence, to hear what he had to say. And his conversations were recorded by one of the disciples, Mahendranath Gupta, and later published as the Sri Ramakrishna Kathamrita, known in English translation as the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna explains the one in the many, in many different forms. And like Abhinavagupta before him, he uses this image of the ocean and its waves. I'm going to read 3 examples of this because each one is a little different and each one has a little bit of knowledge to impart that the other ones don't. On September 7th, 1883, here's what Sri Ramakrishna said. That which is Brahman is verily Shakti. I address that again as the mother. I call it Brahman when it is inactive, and Shakti when it creates, preserves, and destroys. It is like water, sometimes still, and sometimes covered with waves. Then on December 26, 1883, he said, "The process of creation, preservation, and destruction that is going on day and night is due to Shakti, the power of God. This primal power and Brahman are one and the same. Shakti cannot exist without Brahman, just as waves cannot exist without water." And then on October 19th, 1884, the following year, he said this, "That which is Brahman is also Kali, the mother, the primal energy. When inactive, it is called Brahman. Again, when creating, preserving, and destroying, it is called Shakti. Still water is an illustration of Brahman. The same water moving in waves may be compared to Shakti." All three of these statements tell us that Brahman, or what is the ultimate reality in Vedic language, is Shakti, the Divine Mother, the ultimate reality in the Tantric language. Shri Ramakrishna said, and I'll repeat, "That which is Brahman is verily Shakti. I address that again as the Mother." There's something else to learn here. What we call divinity, or God, or reality, has these two aspects. Brahman in the Vedic and Vedantic traditions is called Satchidananda, being, consciousness, bliss. This is a phrase used to describe what is in fact beyond explanation. Now, if something is beyond explanation, this might make Brahman seem to us a bit remote and impersonal. On the other hand, with Shakti, Ramakrishna calls Shakti Kali. He calls Shakti the mother. This is very personal. So again here, rather than a remote, abstract reality, here we have a divinity, a divine presence with which we can have a loving, intimate, and trusting relationship. Again, Brahman and Shakti are one. Brahman is consciousness. Shakti is consciousness expressing itself as creativity. The divine reality is eternally unchanging. Now, how can all of this be true? Again, Shri Ramakrishna says, it is like water, sometimes still and sometimes covered with waves. Also, we learn that Shakti cannot exist without Brahman, just as waves cannot exist without water. So, whether still or in motion, water is the same water. One divine reality, consciousness. And that consciousness is its own creative and self-expressive power. Now we're going to take another look at this idea of one in many, a different view. So far we've spoken pretty much in philosophical, cosmological terms. But many can also refer to that Supreme Shakti personified. And so we're going to turn to the Devi Mahatmya, which is the foremost text of the Shakti Tantra, because this is the praise of the Divine Mother. And in the first chapter, we find the seer Medas telling his disciples, speaking of Shakti, Durga, "She is eternal, having the world as her form. She pervades all this, yet she emerges in various ways." In other words, Shakti, or Durga, assumes many, many different forms, many aspects, many personalities, the Divine Mother seen in countless ways. And throughout the course of his narrative, we understand Durga as fierce and gentle. She is Chandika, who is frightening and terrifying. She is the lovely Ambika. Ambika means mother. It's a sort of a respectful and affectionate term for mother. She's also the blood-guzzling Chamunda Kali, and on throughout this narrative. And in every one of these aspects of the Divine Mother, her purpose is to slay a host of demons. These demons are all in service to the one chief demon, the human ego. And they represent every imaginable human fault and failing that there is. In chapter 10 of the Devi Mahatmya, just before the final battle, only Shumba, the demon who represents the ego, remains. All the others have been slain. And Shumba challenges the Divine Mother. He says to her, O Durga, who are corrupt with the arrogance of power, do not show your pride here. For though you are haughty, you fight depending on the strength of others. The Devi said, I am alone here in the world. Who else is there besides me? Behold, O vile one, these are but projections of my own power, now entering back into me. Thereupon all of those goddesses, led by Brahmani, merged into the Devi's body. Then Ambika alone remained. In this passage, the Divine Mother affirms her true being as one ultimate power and also as the Supreme Self. I am alone here in the world. Who else is there besides me? This is a statement not only of non-duality, but for devotees of the Devi Mahatmya, this statement rises to the level of what is known as a Mahavakya, a great pronouncement, a great saying. The Upanishads have 4 such great sayings. Pure consciousness is Brahman, Pragyanam Brahma. This self is Brahman, I am Atma Brahma. You are that, Tattvamasi. And I am Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi. There's a single infinite consciousness that is the true essence of every soul. And that is what the Mother is also telling us. I am alone here in the world. Who else is there besides me? Next, we're going to turn to Kali, who is another one of the widely recognized aspects of the Divine Mother. And again, Shri Ramakrishna has much to teach us about Kali. He said, my Divine Mother is not only formless, she has forms as well. One can see her forms. One can behold her incomparable beauty through feeling and love. The Mother reveals herself to her devotees in different forms. On October 27, 1882, Keshav Sen, who was a follower of Sri Ramakrishna and the leader of the Brahmo Samaj, arranged for a cruise down the Ganges. And on that occasion, Ramakrishna had much more to say about Kali. And as M records in the Gospel, he said this smiling. It is she alone who is known as Mahakali, Nitya Kali, Shmashana Kali, Raksha Kali, and Shama Kali. Mahakali and Nitya Kali are mentioned in the Tantra philosophy. When there were neither the creation, nor the sun, the moon, the planets, and the earth, when darkness was enveloped in darkness, then the Mother, the formless one, Mahakali, the great power, was one with Mahakala, the Absolute. Shyamakali has a somewhat tender aspect and is worshipped in the Hindu households. She is the dispenser of boons and the dispeller of fear. People worship Raksha Kali, the protectress, in times of epidemic, famine, earthquake, drought, and flood. Shmashana Kali is the embodiment of the power of destruction. She resides in the cremation ground, surrounded by corpses, jackals, and terrible female spirits. From her mouth flows a stream of blood. From her neck hangs a garland of human heads, and around her waist is a girdle made of human hands. After the destruction of the universe, my Divine Mother, the embodiment of Brahman, gathers together the seeds for the next creation. After the creation, the primal power dwells in the universe itself. She brings forth this phenomenal world and then pervades it. On another occasion, Sri Ramakrishna spoke specifically of the image of Kali. And here's what he had to say. That which has form, again, is without form. That which has attributes, again, has no attributes. Brahman is Shakti, Shakti is Brahman. They are not two. These are only two aspects, male and female, of the same reality. Whatever you perceive in the universe is the outcome of this union. Take the image of Shiva and Kali. Kali stands on the bosom of Shiva. Shiva lies under her feet like a corpse. Kali looks at Shiva. All this denotes the union of Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is inactive. Therefore, Shiva lies on the ground like a corpse. Prakriti performs all her activities in conjunction with Purusha. Thus, she creates, preserves, and destroys. This is a very important passage from the Gospel of Shri Ramakrishna, because if we really stop to think about it, we will never look at the image of Kali again in the same way. Yes, it appears to portray two figures, Kali and Shiva. But let's look more closely. Shiva is lying recumbent at Kali's feet. His body is white, smeared with ash. Kali is black. Her black feet are dancing on his chest, dancing the dance of creation. Where this happens, this is the point of contact between the absolute and the relative, between Shiva and Shakti. They are not two, they are in fact one. And this image expresses their indissoluble unity. Consciousness at rest in the unity of its own being, that same consciousness as dynamic creativity, producing this whole wide-ranging world that we experience in our individual lives. On 28th November 1883, Shri Ramakrishna addressed a group of his own disciples and some members of the Brahmo Samaj. And in this particular occasion, he spoke rather philosophically, in the tantric manner. He said, "The primordial power and the supreme Brahman are identical. You can never think of one without the other. They are like the gem in its brilliance. One cannot think of the brilliance without the gem, or of the gem without its brilliance. It is the primordial power that has become the universe and its living beings and the 24 cosmic principles. It is a case of involution and evolution." 18 days later, on 16 December of that year, Shri Ramakrishna spoke in private to Mahendranath Gupta, and he spoke of his own direct experience. This is one of my favorite passages from the Gospel. "The Divine Mother revealed to me in the Kali temple that it was she who had become everything. She showed me that everything was full of consciousness. The image was consciousness. The altar was consciousness. The water vessels were consciousness. The door sill was consciousness. The marble floor was consciousness. All was consciousness. I found everything inside the room soaked, as it were, in bliss, the bliss of Satchidananda. I saw a wicked man in front of the Kali temple, but in him I also saw the power of the Divine Mother vibrating. That is why I fed a cat with the food that was to be offered to the Divine Mother. I clearly perceived that the Divine Mother herself had become everything, even the cat." 10 days later, on 26 December 1883, Shri Ramakrishna said, very succinctly, "The absolute and the relative belong to one and the same reality." This has profound meaning. It means that the supreme non-dual consciousness and the divine manifestation as multiplicity are one. But the thing what he's trying to tell us is, as long as we think of one and many, non-duality and duality, we're still making a distinction. We're still caught in duality. We have to go beyond that to a consciousness that transcends the one and the many. Abhinavagupta, 800 years earlier, made the same point. He coined a word to express this, paradvaita, the supreme non-duality that includes duality, non-duality, everything, the supreme oneness that excludes nothing. So Sri Ramakrishna also says, the manifold has come from the one alone, the relative from the absolute. There is a state of consciousness where the many disappears and the one as well, and the one as well. For the many must exist as long as the one exists. Brahman is without comparison. Again, this ultimate truth, this ultimate oneness is completely inexpressible beyond anything we can imagine. Now, we can't really speak of Kali without mentioning another one of her greatest devotees, and that is Ram Prasad Sen, the great poet of Bengal in the 18th century. Ram Prasad was a great devotee of the Mother, and Shri Ramakrishna was well acquainted with Ram Prasad's songs. They were sung frequently at Dakshineshwar and recorded in the Gospel. Now, if we approach these devotional songs expecting to find any expression of conventional piety, forget it. It's just not there. Ram Prasad expressed an intimacy with the Mother that was truly remarkable. He would complain to her. He would criticize. He would complain about his misery, the circumstances of his life, the imperfection of the world. He would go on and on. He would tell her things that he knew he couldn't hide anyway. She's the Mother. The Mother knows everything within our hearts and minds. There's nothing we can hide from her. And she loves us as only a mother could, unconditionally. So Ram Prasad's songs are undoubtedly outpourings of the heart. But some of them are also expressions of a profound knowledge born of his own high spiritual experiences. There are two songs in particular that I'd like to quote, just because they are so extraordinary. The first one speaks again of the unity of Kali and Brahman, but it also speaks of Ram Prasad's own experience. He's telling us this because he has known it directly. This time I have thoroughly understood. From one who knows it well, I have learned the secret of contemplation. I have learned it from one in whose realm there is no night. Now dawn and evening are the same to me, and their formal devotions have grown barren. I have shaken off the sleep of unknowing, and shall slumber no more. Awake in knowledge, I have lulled my sleep to sleep forevermore. Devotion and liberation alike I bear shining on my brow, says Prasad, and have let all rituals slip away, knowing the secret that Kali and Brahman are one. The second song I'm going to quote celebrates the divine presence in and through all things. O Mother, you are present in every form, throughout the vast universe and in its smallest things. Wherever I go, wherever I look, I see you, O Mother, in your all-embracing oneness. The entire world of earth and water, fire and air and birth and death, all of it is you. Mountains, plants, and the creatures of land, water, and air, all things moving and unmoving in this beautiful world, says Prasad, are expressions of your divine intent. Now, these songs express profound spiritual experience, realization. Ram Prasad worshipped the Mother primarily as Kali, but he realized that her form was made of consciousness. He saw her presence not only in her images, but in every atom of this universe. He also experienced her as the transcendental radiance of consciousness, Prakasha, devoid of all form. And he knew her as Shakti and Shiva. He knew her as Kali and Brahman. He knew her as relative and absolute. He knew her as the highest reality, that inexpressible unity beyond all things. Now, here during the autumn season at the Vedanta Society, as I mentioned earlier, we celebrate the pujas of Durga, Kali, and Sri Sarada Devi, the Holy Mother. So I'm going to make a few comments about Sarada Devi. She exemplified humanity and divinity both. They were both very strong in her. She personified the Divine Mother's own unconditional love. And because of this, she became known by her disciples affectionately as Holy Mother, a name we still call her by today. She welcomed all. She turned away none. She was the mother of all humanity. And she instructed her disciples with a humility and a simplicity born of true wisdom. In later years, Sri Sarada Devi became the guiding presence for the Ramakrishna order. And I'll quote briefly from Swami Prabhavananda, my guru, who visited her once at her home in Jarambati. And this is what he said. There was an extraordinary quality about Holy Mother. She seemed to many who met her exactly like their own mother. Now, so far, we have explored the idea of the Divine Mother and her many manifestations only within the Hindu context. But the Mother is truly universal, and she does not restrict herself to one particular religion. Now, as our puja season moves on, we're looking ahead to celebrating Christmas, the birth of Jesus. Now, where there's a birth, guess what? There's a mother. In this case, Mary. Historically speaking, Miriam started out as Miriam, a young Jewish woman who gave birth to Yeshua, who became a great teacher during his lifetime, and whose message lived on to this present day and now has reached the entire world. Now, beyond the province of Judea, Yeshua became known as Yesu, or Jesus, and he became known as the incarnate Son of God. Mary was rarely mentioned by the earliest church fathers, but by the 3rd century of this era, in other words, the 200s, Mary became widely known by the laity as Theotokos. This is a Greek word meaning God-bearer, Theotokos. And at the Council of Ephesus in the year 431, that title became official, and that, in the minds of many, raised Mary to divine status. And this had profound consequences. At the same time in history, Jesus was becoming more and more identified with the Father in heaven, who was less human and more divinely remote. At that same time, Mary was present as an intercessor, the loving and powerful protective mother who would intervene or represent humans before this divinity. Now here's where it gets really, really interesting. Mary was elevated in the minds of many as a almost divinity, at least, but at the same time, the entire Greco-Roman world already had a well-established mother goddess. She had ruled in Egypt for over 3,000 years as Aset. And when her worship spread throughout the Mediterranean world and northward in Europe as far as London and Scandinavia, she became known by her Greek name, Isis. And she became called Isis Midionymus, Isis of countless names. She was the power and essence of all gods and goddesses. Isis was described as the mistress of the stars. She ruled over heaven and earth. She established laws. She presided over order and justice. But despite all of this cosmic grandeur, she never lost her approachability. She was said to instill the breath of life in her offspring, her human offspring. She was the tender mother, the great nourisher and sustainer, and she was the source of all life. And because she was the source of all life, human, animal, and plant, was viewed as sacred. This was a basic tenet of her religion. Isis was also associated very strongly with ships and sailing. And here, recall Ramakrishna's image of Kali, Bhavatarini. She takes her children across the ocean of worldly existence. Isis likewise was said to grant safe passage through life, because life was as fraught with danger as a sea voyage. Isis also had the power of granting immortality. Now, during this period, Christian theology was striving to define itself, to establish itself. And in doing so, it had to draw upon older, better established traditions, those of Egypt and Greece most specifically, even though it viewed them religiously as competitors. Already, the moral excellence that had been attributed to Isis for thousands of years was now attributed to Mary. And scholars note that many of the titles that Mary bears had earlier been also ascribed to Isis. There are collections of devotional hymns of praise called eratologies. One of the nice things about preparing a talk is sometimes you learn a new word, eratology, a devotional hymn. And the terms used in these aritologies, these poetic hymns of praise, very often are found both in the hymns to Isis and the hymns to Mary. For example, Isis was known as Stella Maris. This is Latin for star of the sea. Mary became Stella Maris. Isis was lauded as the Great Virgin, also as the Mother of God. So both Isis and Mary also were praised as, get this, the first great principle in which the elements are all specifically contained. To me, that is a definition of Prakriti. In the year 381, the Emperor Theodosius made Christianity the official and only religion of the Roman Empire. And as all the other faiths were gradually suppressed, Mary gradually replaced Isis, and devotion to her grew among her Christian devotees well into the Middle Ages. There was a very, very well-established Mariology, or worship of Mary. Now, I'd like to conclude by reading a passage from a novel, Metamorphoses by Apuleius. This was written in the 2nd century. It is the earliest complete novel to survive from Roman times. The reason I want to read this particular passage is that it's very deeply meaningful to me, and I hope that it will inspire you as well. The novel is an adventure story. It's quite a wild tale, but at the same time, it is really a spiritual allegory. It is about identity, knowing our true self. The protagonist, Lucius, is rescued by Isis from dire catastrophes, and as a result of that, he decides to dedicate his life to her. And so he takes vows, he becomes her disciple. And here's the vow that Lucius made soon after his initiation. Now, this part of the novel is purely autobiographical because the author, Apuleius himself, was an initiate of Isis. And here, in this beautiful passage, he conveys his most heartfelt devotion to the Divine Mother. I think in it you'll hear echoes of some of the things we've spoken about before in the Hindu tradition. O holy, perpetual sustainer of the human race, ever bountiful and caring for mortals, you grant a mother's sweet affection to the wretched and troubled. No day, no time of sleep, no idle moment passes by without the touch of your kindness. So it is that you protect mortals on sea and land and extend your saving hand to drive off the storms of life. With that same hand you draw back the threads of the fates, however inextricably they are tangled. You soften Fortuna's storms and restrain the harmful courses of the stars. The gods above honor you, those below heed you. You cause the world to turn. You give the sun its light. You rule the world, and you crush underfoot the evil of the lower realms. The stars are accountable to you. On you the returning seasons depend. Before you the deities rejoice, and it is you whom the elements serve. At your nod the breezes blow, rain clouds nurture the earth, seeds sprout, and shoots grow forth. All tremble before your majesty, the birds soaring in the sky, the beasts roaming on the mountains, the serpents lurking in the ground, the creatures swimming in the sea. But as for me, my talent is too small to sing your praises, and my wealth too paltry to offer sacrifices. I have neither the fecundity of speech, nor 1,000 mouths and as many tongues, nor an endless and tireless flow of words to express how I feel about your majesty. Therefore, I shall strive to do as any pious but poor soul can. I shall keep your divine countenance and your most holy presence within the secret depth of my heart, and envision you there in my unceasing contemplation. I'll close with a chant. Chitirupena ya kritsnam etad vyapya sita jagat namastasyai 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 namo namaha. To her who pervades this entire world and abides in the form of consciousness, salutation to her, salutation to her, salutation to her again and again. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace.